Ladies and gentlemen, salam sejahtera, a very good morning and a warm welcome to all of you, as well as to our speaker for today, Mr. Lawrence Kong. Today's talk is part of a series of webinars focusing on Malaysia's competitiveness performance and ranking as assessed and reported yearly by international organizations, namely the International Institute for Management Development, or in short IMD, in their World Competitiveness Yearbook, and the World Economic Forum, or in short WEF, in their Global Competitiveness Report. Yeah? So we have two international organizations doing this yearly assessment on competitiveness for economies around the world or countries around the world, and they report the ranking and performance on a yearly basis. In the recent World Competitiveness Yearbook 2020, year 2020, in short, it's called WCY 2020, Malaysia's competitiveness ranking has slipped to 27th position from 22nd. 27 slipped from 22nd position in 2019, slipped to 27th position in 2020, out of 63 countries assessed by IMD. This overall competitiveness score and rank is calculated based on 255 criteria, comprising 163 hard data, as in hard statistics, and 92 survey data obtained through a survey called Executive Opinion Survey. And these data are categorized into the 4 competitiveness factors, according to IMD, which are the economic performance, government efficiency, business efficiency, and infrastructure. In our webinar today, our speaker, Mr. Lawrence Kong, will be presenting on tariff barriers, which is a criterion in the government efficiency factor, and how these tariff barriers will affect our country's competitiveness. So before I hand over today's session to our speaker, first allow me to introduce him here. Mr. Lawrence Kong is a certified Six Sigma Black Belt. Certified Six Sigma Master Black Belt, and a quality and productivity trainer from Next MU Private Limited, which he founded in 2011. He's an engineer by practice. And prior to Next MU, Mr. Lawrence started his career in Motorola Electronics and worked there for 15 years before joining Motorola University's External Training and Consulting Group as a Lean Six Sigma consultant. Mr. Lawrence has 20 years of extensive experience as a practitioner in teaching and sharing, project mentoring, coaching, consulting to various companies, embarking on process management or business process management and continuous improvement programs. And in the last decade, he has been actively working with small and medium enterprises in Singapore in various productivity, innovation, and continuous improvement programs. He has provided consulting services to diverse industries and functions, such as information communication, media and design, logistics and storage, electronics, precision engineering, general manufacturing, financial services, retail, food and beverages, administrative and support services, university and academia, non-governmental organizations, construction, hospitality, aviation services, laboratory testing services, and government. And with that, over to you, Mr. Lawrence.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, BW. My presentation today will be on tariff barrier. Like what BW mentioned, this is part of the World Competitiveness series in terms of trying to improve this criteria. So the presentation I have today is mainly going to focus on criteria 2.4.01 in the WCY 2020. Specifically, we're going to look at how this tariff barrier will affect the competitiveness in Malaysia's ranking in the global scene. I'm going to guide you through using these PowerPoints. First of all, I'm going to talk about the measurement process and the definition of the data, how IMD is using the definition to collect data, present them in across the different economies. You see on this slide, I have the flow of how IMD actually collects data from Malaysia. So on the lower left, you see the ministry responsible for furnishing the data is our International Trade Ministry, MITI. MITI actually is responsible for furnishing the trade data to organization like World Trade Organization. But before MITI collects this data, it has to work with a federal function like our Royal Customs Department, because we're talking about tariff rate over here. So this tariff rates actually refers to the import tariff rates. So whatever that is coming into Malaysia, when our importers trying to buy goods and services into Malaysia, will be liable to pay some kind of percentage of tax. So tariff, in our definition here, is a kind of tax the importers will have to pay. So whatever goods that comes into Malaysia, the point of entry will be through the customs. So in Malaysia, we have got different points of entry in different customs in different states. The customs department also need to work with other functions, like for example the free trade zones, free commercial zones, because even though those zones are classified as free trade, they take advantage of the free tariff, when they import materials into those zones. But as soon as they manufacture the products based on the raw material they import from overseas, they can either export it out or they can ship it to the local market. So as soon as they ship the manufactured product to local market, Malaysia government will impose tariff on those products because those will be used for local consumption. So we have about 12 free industrial zones in Malaysia, 13 free commercial zones in Malaysia. Those are the points where customs will have to work with to capture tariff data in case there are manufactured goods going to local markets. Apart from that, customs also do have bounded warehouses where they can store incoming goods from overseas without releasing it yet. They can hold the goods for a maximum period of about 2 years. So as soon as the goods leave the warehouse, the tariff will be imposed. So you can see customs are actually the entry points where they work with different functions to collect tariff rate data before compiled and then transferred, uploaded. MITI will be responsible for transmitting this information to the International Trade Database. So WTO remains as one of the major organizations who looks at the trade data. Because IMD is tapping data from World Bank. So World Bank also develops its own database system. It's called the World Integrated Trade Solution. In short, it's WITS, WITS. So WITS was developed by World Bank, and they actually partner up with different organizations, including WTO. So the data that World Bank is using actually is consistent with the different partners of WITS, because the entry point is uploaded by MITI. So World Bank will use the tariff rate data, compile into average. I'm going to talk about the different kinds of tariff rates calculation. According to IMD, the average used is called the most favored nation average, using weighted mean for all products. So you can see we are looking at only the physical goods, all products, we are not including the services, even though some of those are subject to tax as well, but we only look at all products for goods. And goods here refer to two big chunks of categories. One is called the agriculture, one is the non-agriculture products. So IMD will compute the average tariff rates based on the MFN, most favored nation, weighted, calculated average. And then the different countries' average tariff rates will be calculated this way and compared. And in 2020, IMD reports Malaysia tariff rate data from 2016 was used for some reason. I did a search on the WITS website. They also only have Malaysia data up to 2016. So anything beyond that is not available yet. I do not know the clear reason. It could be because of data not uploaded yet, or they are still cleaning it up. So that one, I'm not too sure. So 2016 tariff rate data from Malaysia is used to compare with other nations. We were at number 42nd position in 2019. In 2020, we dropped, like what PW said, to 53 out of 63 economies. So we are pretty much at the bottom. If you look across the whole spectrum of economies, it's not so good. It's 11, spaces displaced in 1 year. So we're going to talk about why our tariff rate is not as competitive compared to the other nations. But we're going to use the historical data of 2016 to look at how we perform in that year. What are the factors that cause the tariff rate to be still that high compared to other economies? So hopefully this slide will explain to you how the whole comparison came about right from our own customs department. Before I proceed more, I need to talk about the different types of tariffs, because in this kind of comparison, we need to be clear about what kind of tariffs we're looking at and what kind of calculation method we're using to use the data that IMD is using in comparison. You probably can see on the screen, there are different kind of tariff terms. MFN is what IMD is using, but there are other terms that we use, like, for example, preferential, bound, simple average, weighted average, ad valorem, applied. Let me walk you through these different types. So when we talk about how the tariff affects the competitiveness, all these different tariff types actually play a part, not just the MFN part. So in terms of how Malaysia and as well as other nations who is imposing import tariff, we actually are using, for example, bound tariff to specify maximum. So we need to know how they relate to each other before we can talk about it. So most favored nation, that's what IMD is using. In short, we call MFN. Even though the name suggests that it's most favored, it sounds like we are giving some kind of favoritism to certain countries, but in fact we are not. MFN actually is a practice. WTO encourages, actually right now is mandates the members to follow. So what it means is that if, let's say, a nation is giving a preferential tariff to another country, this nation will have to give the same treatment to the rest of the member countries within WTO. So let's say, for example, A country gives a certain low percentage of import tariff to goods, let's say commodity A, to nation B. But because nation C, D, E are also members in WTO, so nation A will have to give the same tariff rate treatment, not only to nation B, but C, D, E as well. Right? So what it means is that every time a country lowers a tariff rate, or we call the trade barrier, because we are going for free trade eventually, when this country is opening up for markets in the international trade, is to give the same treatment to the rest of the nations within the same membership. So what WTO is advocating is that it doesn't matter whether the country is rich or poor, whether you are a developed country or you are a developing country, or even the least developed countries, there's no discrimination, right? So they are encouraging fair trade without discrimination. We'll talk about what if there's discrimination, because WTO's function also includes, the settlement, also a framework on how nations can bring up disputes, or when they think there are instances of discrimination, to the WTO, and WTO will facilitate this kind of negotiation and settlement of disputes. So when IMD is using the tariff rate data, is tapping on MFN rates. That means what we offer to Malaysia, how we give the different, for example, the WTO members the same kind of import tariff rates. So you see on this slide, MFN tariff. Oh, okay, there's MFN. It's a typo, not MSN. I beg your pardon. There are two other kinds that can be seen in contrast with this MFN tariff. One is called bound tariff. Bound tariff refers to maximum tariff rates, right? The other one is called preferential tariff. Preferential tariff refers to the normally lowered tariff rate compared to MFN tariff a country is giving to another country. So this can be based on the agreement between these two countries, or it can be based on some kind of agreement among different countries. So preferential tariff rate is always lower than the MFN tariff rates, and MFN tariff rate is always lower than the bound tariff rates. Now, why is that bound tariff rates? Bound tariff rate actually is being used by different countries when they go into negotiation in the international trade. For example, you have two countries, for example, they are trying to negotiate the tariff for their goods in the WTO framework. They will use bound tariff as a mean to negotiate. So they will only negotiate what would be the maximum rate they're going to impose to the food or the manufactured goods or the agricultural goods categories. For example, they are going to impose like how much the ceiling tariff rate is going to be for that certain food category or whatever it is, or the goods category. So what they promise is that they will not charge more than this ceiling. So the bound tariff rate actually is something that they use to negotiate. When they are talking about the reduction in tariff rates in the trade agreements, they are using bound tariff. So preferential tariff is normally given because of goodwill, because of agreement, because of the relationship between nations. Normally is lower than MFN tariff rates. We are not using preferential tariff rate in our calculation, but we're using MFN tariff rates. So you can see in the agreement, in the tariff schedule for countries to reduce over the years, bound tariff is specified for different goods categories. So that gives us some idea about how to analyze the tariff rates. If you want to look at why is Malaysia being ranked so low, in the comparison in competitiveness, we can actually look at the gaps. So if you look at the gap between the bound tariff and the MFN rates, that will tell us something about the opportunity for us, as a nation, to see where we can dwell into reducing the tariff for which food categories or goods categories, for example. So if you can imagine for certain commodity, let's say it's milk, for example, we probably have a bound tariff for that food category. But when we impose that, during the incoming of the actual milk, imported goods, we might impose the MFN tariff. So the gap between that is called the binding overhang. The binding overhang can range from 0 to all the way, huge. So if you think about the implication of big binding overhang or small binding overhang, we can think about which are the goods categories we could look into to see, they are still having high tariff rates. Now, let's say the binding overhang is 0. Oh, that is actually referring to when we charge the tariff rates as high as the ceiling. That means we are charging maximum. That can happen. It means when you look at the gap, there's no gap, right? So that means for some reason, we're still charging to the maximum. But if the binding overhang is very low, let's say there are still like a huge gap, let's say 50%, 60% binding overhang. That means we're not charging to the ceiling yet. We are promising other nations that we're going to charge to the maximum, but we're not charging to that level. We're charging much lower than that. So that also gives, another indication that we could possibly look at that goods categories. If we are charging not to the ceiling, but yet we are promising that we're not going to charge to the ceiling, why not we lower the ceiling? So those kind of insights, if we look into binding overhang analysis, could give us some kind of Pareto or priority in terms of which categories of goods we could look into prioritizing in terms of reduction in tariff. So hopefully this will give you some idea about the different tariffs when we talk about the analysis later on. The calculation, put it simply, there are two types of averages. You could get the average tariff rates. If you can imagine, there are so many different goods categories, thousands. Some category will have 0 tariff rates. Some will have as high as more than 100%. One way on the left, simple average, you could calculate the average tariff rate is by adding up all the different tariff rates. They are still non-zero, and divide by the tariff categories. So that is very straightforward. Just adding up all the tariff rate, they are not 0, and then divided by how many categories we are actually taking the rates from. However, that is not the way we are calculating the MFN simple average the IMD is using in comparing with other nations or economies. IMD is using the one on the right, weighted average. You can probably imagine we could have some goods categories with very high tariff rate, but we may not be importing those categories of goods that much. So when you calculate all the tariff rates divided by the tariff categories, it may not be a fair comparison because it depends on the year that we're looking into. We may not import certain categories with high tariff rate. In that case, we may be underreporting. If we are only importing goods with very low tariff rates. So to be fair, we look into the weighted average. That means we put the weights onto the kind of goods and the volumes that we import in actual terms, right? So the term that they use is called applied. So applied means what are the actual incurred imports from overseas, from the trading partners into Malaysia by value. So if you look at the weighted average calculation, the numerator actually is looking at the total tariff revenue, how much we are actually reaping from the tariff tax that we impose on the goods. So what it means is that you basically have to take into account the quantity, the volume, and the cost of the goods. For example, how much the goods are being declared at the custom values, so-called. Sometimes they use that to look into how much we actually have in the total tariff revenue. The denominator is all the import value. That means how much we actually import and how much the total value of the imports are. So if you look at this fraction, is weighted. So we actually look at the actual imports of the year. We then can have a fairer tariff rate calculation by average. So hopefully this is clearer. Now, if you look at the different kinds of goods, I talk about thousands of goods. Now, fortunately, there's a system that different economies are following. At least from what I know, the member countries from WTO are following this. When you are trying to import goods from another country, for example, you will have to specify what we call the HS code of that goods. It's called harmonized system codes. Harmonized system codes was developed by the World Customs Organization, WCO. Actually, it came into effect quite many years ago. If I'm not wrong, it's about 1988. They already came into effect, and it has gone through many changes throughout the years. Every 5 to 6 years also, WCO will revise these codes, right? So that the codes for the goods, they are still relevant to the trading scene, can be used. So these codes actually have 4 different levels, right? You can imagine it's like a book. You have first of all the section. The top level is a section. The section refers to, you can see on the screen, I'm using a vegetable product to represent this section. So you can see if you want to look for vegetable products, you should look into section 2. So under vegetable products, you have sub vegetable products. So the next layer is called chapter. So you have many different chapters within a section. Within a chapter, there are different headings. So within each heading, there are subheadings. So you can see on the left, all in all, the latest HS code is based on 2017 version. The next version is going to be 2022, every 5 years. So as we speak, WCO is actually already planning to make the next version come into effect in 2022. So there are actually more than 10,000 categories of goods you can choose from. So as an importer, it's very important for the importer to look into the HS codes and specify which goods the importer wishes to import, because the tax is imposed all the way to the different levels of these HS codes. So IME is using 6 digit, up to 6 digits. So you can imagine section, there are 2 to 4 digits. Chapter, there are 2 digits. Heading, there are 2 digits. Subheading, there are 2 digits. So at least we should follow up to 6 digits. Different countries, they may have additional 2 to 4 digits to represent their goods, but we're not going to go into that detail. All we have to know is that the 6 digit at least is standard for countries to pick the goods that they're trying to import, so they can then check out what kind of tariff rate is imposed by the different countries that they're going to export, they're going to get it in, right? So let me show you the summary of the imports that Malaysia had in 2016. To recap, why we use 2016 is because IMD used 2016 data from Malaysia to compare with the rest of the economies. So I'm just going to give you a snapshot of how Malaysia performed in 2016. So at least you know, okay, what do we import? Who do we import from? How much the quantity and which categories of goods we import more? And and the kind of information. So this will be useful for you to follow through later on. I'm just trying to give you the bird's eye view, comparing Malaysia simple average tariff rates, MFN, weighted, applied. So if I compare this with the rest of the world, this data is taken from WITS, from the World Bank. You can see if we lump all the rest of the average tariff rates from the rest of the world and compare Malaysia, we actually lower if you look at the entire comparison. Now, it's very interesting to look at this because IMD is looking into 63 economies. But when you go into the World Bank, the WITS database, this is tapped from WTO. So WTO has at least 164 countries as members, and apart from that, they have I think about 23 observers, and there are about 16 countries yet to become members. The observers are in the process of applying for membership. So all in all, you have at least 160 something economies. So if you look into the comparison, we are not comparing just among the 63 economies. We're actually comparing more, and yet we are not that bad. So if I look into more detail, let me come down from 10,000 feet point of view. 8,000 feet, for example, I'm comparing with different regions. First of all, the South Asia region. You can see in 2016, Malaysia is not that bad. There are many nations who have tariff rate more than what we had in 2016. If I compare with the Middle East and North Africa regions, again, we fare actually quite good if you look into the different countries. Right? So by the way, IMD economies are a bit different from WTO countries. Some countries are not included in WTO because they are not countries per se. IMD is looking into economies. So some are subset, some are not. So we can't really compare apple to apple. I'm just trying to give you a snapshot from where Malaysia is in a bigger picture, not just the 63 countries, but 63 economies, but in a bigger picture. This slide shows you Latin America, Caribbean regions compared to the Malaysia average tariff rates. Again, you can see the arrow, we are actually quite low. Europe, Central Asia regions, okay, we are now at the bottom. The higher the worse. That's what we are trying to look at. Comparing East Asia and Pacific regions, you can see there are other regions that are higher. Some are lower. And if you look at the best country, Hong Kong, Singapore, they are free trade. It means they are not imposing tariff rate into any imports going into the countries, right? This slide talks about the major import partners in 2016. It means where do we import goods from? All right, so you can see the highest was from China with the import value in total in the year. Second is from our neighbor, right, Singapore, and then US, Japan, Thailand. These are the top 5 trading partners we had in 2016. If you have a chance to look into years beyond 2016, you see that the trading partners don't change that much. They stay around the same. But 2020 probably will be a bit deep in terms of the volume, but the trading partners population, the proportions are more or less the same. This slide talks about the breakdown of the trading partners as well as the values of imports as well as the export. Why we look into exports, we are looking at the total trade, right? Coming in, going out. Import is only part of the equation, right? To have a balanced trade, we normally look into whether our trade is in a deficit or in a surplus. And nations normally are very interested in looking into trade surplus. So what it means is that we want to have more export compared to imports. Right? That is like so-called healthier trade performance. You can see our trade has been healthy throughout the years. 2016, compared to the trend before that, we are in an increasing trend, right? At least up to then. These are the different categories of imports in 2016. What did Malaysia import? The top few categories of goods. E&E, that remains one of the strong imports that we had. Chemicals, chemical products, machinery, petroleum products, transport equipment, right? Some of these are still with very high tariffs. Some of these may not be, right? For example, E&E, which is part of the IT product, and actually we are not imposing a tariff anymore because of the IT agreement. The tariff is already been scrapped, right? So there's no IT related tariff, not only in Malaysia but in for at least the WTO member countries. Right? So later on we're going to look at which of these is still having high tariffs. So there is a snapshot of how we perform in the import scene in 2016 from Malaysia. So I'm going to show you just one slide. Who are the key authorities and what are the policies that we follow right now in managing this import tariff. MITI, as I say on the first slide, Ministry of International Trade and Industry. They are the responsible party regulator in looking into going for free trade in the long run. So the trade policy, the maintenance, the review, the negotiation will be managed by this ministry. So some of the key policies are like countervailing and anti-dumping duties, the act and the regulation. We're going to talk about this because these are actually part of trade barriers that a country can impose, and according to WTO, these are actually a no-no. You know, even though there's no like, you know, a hard restriction, but it's not encouraged. So this countervailing, anti-dumping, they are actually trade barriers that we can actually bring up to WTO for, you know, dispute settlement. Multilateral trade policy and negotiation. This is a major one because the tariff reduction normally happens within a trade policy review and negotiation when it comes to the country schedule according to the schedule that is published. So as a developing country, according to the schedule, we had our last trade policy review in 2017. So normally this happens once in every 3 to 4 years. So because of the current COVID-19 pandemic, the subsequent trade policy review for Malaysia, I think it's going to be pushed back compared to the original schedule, which is going to be, I think, this year. So it will be pushed back to at least 2021 or even later. Yeah. The other key authority that I'm putting here is the Royal Malaysian Customs Department, because this department looks into the imports. You know, they are like the guardian, right, of the imports. Whenever goods coming in, they have to check whether it's something that we have to collect tax from, right? So the key policies are safeguards, tax and regulation, Customs Act. This is a major one for them. Free Zone Act, Excise Act. Free Zone Act applies when the companies in free zone imports raw materials, like I said, and build out the materials into finished goods and release it into local markets. That's when tariff will be imposed, depending on what kind of product. But excise act does not really apply to us, but it's part of the customs policy. This is normally imposed when the goods are manufactured. Right? So at the point of manufacturing, when the goods are being assembled in the finished goods, this is a form of duty that our government is collecting from the companies. So I hope with this information so far, you have a clearer picture of what tariff is, the import tariff, and the kind of calculation, how it's being used in the comparison for the world competitiveness.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Lawrence. Maybe it is a good time now to pause for a while and we see if there are any questions from our participants who have joined us today on this webinar. Now we are open for questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat box.
Oh, let me check.
Feel free to type in your questions in your chat box, and then we will pick it up and we will ask Lawrence for his help to clarify or answer your questions.
Certainly.
Anyone? Let's pause here for a while and wait for a while for questions. Okay, maybe while waiting for the first question to come in, or for some questions to come in, I have a question. Maybe let me kick off with the first question here.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I'd like to check with you, Mr. Lawrence. What about the NTMs or non-tariff measures? I believe non-tariff measures are also like a barrier, which impose certain rates, rates on the imports, of course, as well as exports. But in this case, we are looking at the imports. So how does the non-tariff measures come into the picture? Is it also included in the consideration of the performance for tariff barriers here?
Okay, thank you for the question. I think this question will make it clear for people who probably are thinking along the same thing. Non-tariff barrier is part of the the tariff barrier as well. I think they call it non-tariff measure, like what you put it, the NTMs. We are not considering the NTMs in this criteria because IMD is purely looking into the import tariffs. So if you look at the unit measurement of IMD, the import tariff rate in terms of percentage is calculated based on a simple average weighted MFN and applied. Then NTMs, just to give a bit more information about that, is that it includes anything that can become a barrier in international trade among nations. There's no clear definition, even according to the WTO, what NTMs are, because it can be in many forms. So up to now, the forms that we have seen can be, I'll give you some example. For example, the anti-dumping. Dumping is a kind of non-trade, non-tariff measure, because we're not talking about imposing tariff. But in a way, dumping is a kind of barrier because when dumping happens, the exporting country actually is charging the goods at a price that is much lower than the domestic price. So you can imagine if that happens, when the exporting country is charging the goods at a price that is a much lower price than the domestic market, our local market will be affected. So what that happens is that people will be buying the imported goods more because of the lower price. Then the local domestic produced goods probably are not that attractive anymore. So there's a kind of barrier. The other kind of non-tariff measure could refer to, say, for example, technical tariff. To the goods. So this stricter specification can actually hinder can hinder exporting countries in sending goods to our country, because now their goods probably have the subject to more compliance in terms of specification or even regulation or rules. The same can go to, say, for example, a country can impose a quality, a stricter quality. It can be good, it can be bad. Sometimes, for health, safety, we're not going to look at this over here. I'm sure there are other channels where groups are especially looking at NTMs and look at how actually it affects our competitiveness. Because when you have NTMs, similarly the tariff barrier, it decreases our competitiveness in trade, because we are not really opening up our market, to receiving more goods. So in that case, free trade is NTMs here. Hopefully that's clearer.
All right, thank you for the explanation, Mr. Lawrence. I don't see any questions so far. Maybe we wait for until the end. Until the end of the presentation, we'll have more opportunities to open up to the audience or the participants for questions. So with that, I think carry on, Mr. Lawrence, with your presentation today.
Okay. In that case, let me go back to the slide. I'm going to show you the key drivers that affect this criterion, trade barrier, the import tariff. When looking into the key drivers, I basically have two questions, when we look at the key drivers. The first question is, why do we impose tariff rates? Why do we impose import tariff to goods that we buy from other countries? Right, that's the first question. The second question is, why is our import tariff still so high? Right, so I'm going to address it one by one. Right, so to look at why do we have import tariff? A quick answer is protectionism. Protectionism is a mindset. It's a mindset of a nation trying to protect the domestic producer, trying to protect the domestic industry, or they're trying to protect the local goods. If we don't protect, well, we may be exploited by other countries. Right, so what kind of protectionism is that we're talking about? There are a few kinds. If you remember, when we first had our national automobile, Proton, so when we first started this industry in Malaysia, that was new. So at that time, it was called infants. So industry like this is referred to as infant industry. Right? So infant industry, when it's new, it needs a lot of caring, it needs a lot of protection. We do not want to have threats, especially from the external producer or external seller in affecting the growth of our local industry, especially the infant industry. All right, so at least our government needs to protect them until they become stabilized, until they become economically viable, when we can then release them to have a fair competition in the international scene. But the thing is, how do we define infant industry, and how long do we call an industry infant? Again, it's very difficult to have a clear line. If you call our automotive industry infant today, actually our automotive industry is one of the biggest in Asia right now. Right, it's one of the major players. So do we still need to protect it? Well, I mean, we have to look into two different perspectives over here. Even when I'm presenting this to you, I have to split myself in two perspectives. One is from the economist perspective. One is from the politician perspective, so-called the government. Because the views from these two perspectives can be conflicting. Economists may advocate free trade, but the politician may say, no, we have to protect our industry, because if we don't, why are we here? So if you talk about opening up our markets for free trade, that means we don't impose any tariff, versus we still need to impose some to some of the goods into our markets. These are still like when I'm going through these slides, I will flip between these two views, and I also let you be the judge of whether these arguments are valid for us to move forward to free trade. The whole point about the improvement of this criteria is to move towards free trade. So the lower the import tariff is, the better the ranking Malaysia will have in the future competitiveness ranking. All right, so infant industry is one of them. When we talk about producer, we also have many kinds of goods producers in our domestic markets. So protectionism includes protecting our producers, so that if you can imagine, if we don't impose tariffs to our imports, the price of the international producer, for example, if we assume them to have a comparative advantage, what the term means is that they have better capability, they have better economy of scale in terms of producing goods. They are much better than us, not only in quality but in terms of price, right? So if they can have better marginal costs in producing goods, they are better than us. Of course, the price that we get without tariff will be much lower than the price imposed by our local producer. So if we don't impose tariff, our local producer may not do well. We may not buy local products, right? So that actually links to a concept called producer surplus. So if you think about producer surplus, what this term means is that you're looking into the difference between how much the economic cost of the goods produced by the producer versus what the selling price is. So let's say, for example, if you are referring to a steel manufacturer, a producer of steel, if they can accept the lowest cost of the steel to be, let's say, a dollar, but because of the market price is much higher than the A dollar, the producer still can sell the steel at a much higher price, at the cost that the producer can accept. So you can see the difference is called the surplus. If you have a higher market selling price than the economic cost, then the producer surplus is higher, is positive. Now, producer surplus is important because if we don't have producer surplus, our GDP will drop, because producer surplus actually talks about the profit that we have. If the producer can sell at a higher price, we have profit, national profit, normal profits. And so this links to opportunity cost that we have as a nation. It actually is included in the GDP calculation. Now, when we don't have tariff, the producer may not have a surplus, because the price, the market price, the selling price may be lower if we don't have tariff. If you can imagine, if we don't impose tariff to the import goods, we can buy goods that are cheaper than the local market price. So imagine if other country has a better comparative advantage than us, then the market selling price can be lowered. Then the producer's price will be lowered. This is not good. This is not good for us. So as a nation, who places importance in GDP, who doesn't? All right. So you have to look into producer surplus. So in a way, protect a producer, this measurement is important. Right? So another one is called consumer. If you have producer, you have to look into the other side of the equation, the consumer. Because consumer buy goods. If we don't buy local produced goods, the local producers may not have a high demand, if you can think about that. So do they need more workers? They probably don't. So you probably can think about the loss of jobs if we don't buy local goods, if we don't have producers domestically that have competitive advantage compared to other nations. We have to take care of our own people. We have to look into another issue. It's called consumer surplus. Consumer surplus is the difference between the price that the consumer pay and what the consumer actually pay. Right? So let's say if you're going to pay for let's say price, you need to pay for, you actually pay lower. Can you still hear me?
Mr. Lawrence, we lost you. Yeah, it's intermittent, the connection from your side. So we could not hear you for the last part. Hello? Mr. Lawrence, can you hear us? Can you hear me? Mr. Lawrence? We still cannot hear you. I notice the video image of you has frozen. So connection is a problem, I think. Okay, so sorry for the interruption. Yeah, sorry for the interruption to our participants here. I think Mr. Lawrence is trying to sort out his connection problem. Let's wait for a while. He's trying to figure out whether he can come back online. So just wait for a while. Sorry for the inconvenience. Okay, Sorry again for the inconvenience to all the participants in this webinar. Mr. Lawrence is trying to log off and log in again. Yeah, he's trying to get out of the app, then connect back again. Yeah? So let's wait for a while. Okay, Mr. Lawrence is still trying. I'm not sure whether I want to advise him to restart his computer. Can you hear us, Lawrence? Mr. Lawrence? If you can, okay, if you restart your computer, but it will take a bit of time, yeah, to get back in again. Okay, okay, okay. Can you maybe unmute your mic? Yeah, okay, audio is lost. But okay, he said audio is lost, but then his image is very jerky. So I think the connection is still a problem. Can you hear me, Mr. Lawrence? Okay, he cannot hear anything as well. All right, what is the best way? How about I asked him to reboot his computer and see, yeah? So let's reboot. Okay, just to double check, Kate Adha, are you able to hear me? Just to confirm.
Yes, Mr.
Okay.
Yes. Very
All
clear.
right, thank you. So it's actually Mr. Lawrence side that is having a problem because he's requesting whether we can re-establish the connection for the webinar. But I think better he reboot his computer, right? Since the problem is at his side, instead of we, trying to end the webinar and then restart it again. So yeah, I will ask him to reboot his computer and try and join again and see. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, really sorry for the interruption and the inconvenience. Yeah, these things happen with the unstable internet connection or with the lack of bandwidth sometimes in different locations, even in city like KL or PJ. And incidentally, such internet speed, internet bandwidth is also measured as competitiveness factors for the country in the IMD's World Competitiveness Yearbook. So like I mentioned earlier on in the beginning, there are 255 criteria being used to measure the overall competitiveness of a country like Malaysia. So technological infrastructure is also a competitiveness factor, and bandwidth, internet connection, bandwidth, internet speed, broadband, subscription, all these are also part of a country's competitiveness factors. So not sure where Lawrence is located, but yeah, there was a problem with his connection at his location. Yep, so we will also have webinars in the future talking about technological infrastructure related criteria or factors on how, as a country, we can improve our country's competitiveness if we improve the internet infrastructure for our country. Okay, Lawrence is trying to join back, so let's wait for a while. And hopefully this time it will be okay. We can continue with our webinar again. So waiting for him to come back online. So as post COVID-19 pandemic, I mean post this unprecedented pandemic, we all rely more on the internet for online meetings and for remote working, and all the more we need better internet infrastructure and higher speed for our country. So this is also one of the focus areas that we will talk about and try to improve, to make a business more competitive in the post-COVID-19 era. Okay. He's still having a problem. He's still having a problem to join. Okay. I'm not sure what to do. How to solve this problem. Okay. Encik Adha, any suggestion how Lawrence can join again? Okay, he's saying it's initializing now. Not sure. There was a problem to join again. Something related to connection timeout when you try to click the link to join again. Okay, let's wait for a while and see if he can join back. Not sure whether it's possible to give him another link, like a link for him to click to join again, a fresh link, or he has to use back the same one, maybe. Yeah. Hmm. Okay, we'll try last try. If we are not able to solve the problem, maybe we'll have to continue at another time, yeah, at a different time. The second part of this talk. Uh, Okay, Injada, any suggestion? Should we, I guess, because Mr. Lawrence had already done a reboot of his computer, and we still cannot get him back online, even though he has restarted his computer. And I believe we also cannot end the session and then restart it again. Probably it's better to continue at a different time or on another day. Okay, so I suggest we stop for today, and then we continue this talk at a separate time. We'll reschedule it again, yeah, for the second half of this talk. So I sincerely apologize to participants who have joined today due to this technical problem that we faced. Mr. Lawrence could not get back online. We lost him early on, and before that there was already intermittent connection for him. Then we lost him totally, and now he's not able to join back. So I sincerely apologize, yeah, for the inconvenience caused to everyone. With that, I suggest we end the webinar here today, and we reschedule again, yeah, for the second part of Mr. Lawrence's talk on how tariff barriers affect our country's competitiveness. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Have a good day.